All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. And Sarah, thank you for inviting me to come out to Colorado. So I wanted to talk a bit today about the idea of good work and what it means to do good work, and how might we listen to a calling that's inside of us, and also a calling from all of the people that are touched by the work that we do, our employees, our customers, and also a calling from the earth. How is the earth calling to us right now? I wanted to first tell my story a little bit, just to kind of talk about my own journey to good work and kind of how I ended up at Etsy. In 2003, I moved in, actually my girlfriend, who's now my wife, moved in with this guy, Rob Kalin, into an apartment in Brooklyn. And soon after that, I moved in with them. So it was just a kind of random, advertisement for an available room in an apartment. So it's the first and only handmade wooden computer I've ever seen. Rob built them in his bedroom, which was just filled with saws and sawdust and his bed and a bunch of cats. And so Rob decided he was going to make a website for everybody who made things. And that website was Etsy.com. So this is what Etsy looked like when it first launched in 2005. It's worth noting that Etsy is the second or third website that Rob ever made. And Rob had no idea how to make websites. The reason he got into web design is that he didn't have enough money to pay his rent because he was making handmade wooden computers. He went down to our landlord's office, which was basically right across the street from our building, to tell him that he couldn't pay the rent that month. And he saw a proposal for a website that our landlord owned a restaurant that our landlord owned in the city, and he wanted to build a website for it. And the proposal for the website was exactly twice what Rob owed in rent. And he said, "I'll make your website for half that amount of money." And the guy's like, "Deal." And he's like, "And I can't pay you rent, so we'll just swap the website for the thing." And what I love about that, though, is that Rob had no idea how to make a website. He just saw the opportunity. He went out and got a book on HTML, and he built the website for the Acme restaurant in the city. And another important part of that story, actually, is that Rob wanted to have animated flames on the website, but that wasn't in his book. And so he posted something on a bulletin board at NYU, and 2 engineers responded, and they became the founding engineers of Etsy. So that's how that team came together. And actually was about to take a job in London. My wife is German, and we're like, we can live in Europe. Seems like, well, this would be a great opportunity. And Rob's like, no, come do this with me. And I said, well, what would I do? And he said, you can be the marketing guy. And I said, well, I don't know anything about marketing. He's like, perfect. I remember that conversation so clearly. And so he's like, just do what you did with the band. And so I was like, all right, I'll just do what I did with the band. So here's some of the first marketing for Etsy. And this is a hand-printed poster that I made and placed around Brooklyn promoting our digital product. Nothing screams internet like handmade posters, but it works for bands. But actually, I love this poster too because it very much gets at the sentiment behind Etsy from those really early days, which was kind of, there was a thread of anarchy through Etsy, and we thought very much that we were going to be providing alternatives to mass-produced goods, to things that were being produced at great social and ecological cost. What we decided to do was actually build a space for our community. So we created the Etsy Labs, and actually it was funny because Rob and I had a screen printing business before Etsy. We still had the screen printing press and all of the equipment, and we actually had the business still kind of running on the side. So it was at this moment where we said, all right, we think Etsy's got more traction than like our t-shirt business. Let's move the press into the office. So we moved the whole screen printing shop into the office, and that became the Etsy Labs. And then we filled it up with everything that you need to make whatever you want. And then we just opened it up to Etsy sellers and makers to come and make things. And we had making events. So this is a picture from the Etsy labs in Brooklyn. A few years later, I moved to Germany and did the same thing. This is the Etsy labs in Berlin. And the idea was, how do we build community, not just sell stuff wherever we go? So it forced us to really codify the values and the mission and what it is that we were trying to do. Because early on, we could just say that doesn't feel right, or that doesn't feel like us. And everyone would know what we meant. But when you start to move into new countries, into new places, you really have to start investing in that and really making sure that it's something that's deeply embedded in the ethos of everybody who's working there. We really were committed to growing in the right way and having, were these strong values that were underpinning the company from the very beginning. I do remember, maybe a year or two before this that Rob and I were talking about making Etsy a cooperative. And we said it should be a worker-owned co-op, actually should be owned by all of the community members. And I remember a conversation with the board saying, well, that's a lovely idea, but no way. I remember actually another story I didn't tell the other day is that when Etsy was starting to work and become a thing, a lot of venture capitalists got interested in Etsy. And a venture capitalist who's well known and who I'll remain nameless for now, came to meet with Rob. And Rob, they were talking for a long time, and then Rob's like, don't you need to go? Isn't your flight now? And the guy's like, oh, no, I came on a private jet. And Rob's like, get out. He's like, I'm not taking money from someone who has a private jet. It's kind of what we were talking about the other day too. Like, you're made to feel foolish if you're turning down someone who wants to give you money. Like, what are you, stupid? Like, this is what you're supposed to do. This is what success looks like. Were I to do it over again, I would really focus on the values and also a clear understanding of what success looks like. How much is enough? What is it that we're really trying to do? And think about that from the beginning so that when you're growing the company, you can do it in ways that are in concert with what it is you're hoping to bring into the world. Hello Etsy was how we introduced Etsy to Europe. And I mention this because it was a pretty important moment for Etsy. As I mentioned, we were really investing in the values and the ethos behind the company. And for many years, people have been asking us to put on a craft fair, and maybe we should just put on a big craft fair in each European city. And we did do that kind of stuff too. But the first thing that we did was actually have a conference on economics. We really wanted to think about, how do we use the business itself as the engine for impact in the world. And so, here I was running this team and really hardworking, well-meaning people. And, they're like, here's the, latest SEO report. And I was like, it's like my eyes glazing over. I'm like, this is so great. Like, I want you to have whatever you need to be successful, but like, I'm not going to say that I'm really that excited about that. So I actually wrote an email to Chad and said, I appreciate this great opportunity, but, I don't want to be running marketing. And, that was at that point, a vulnerable thing to do because that was my job. And that's telling your boss that, like, I don't want my job. I had, at this point, one child and another on the way. So also a pretty critical moment. And I said, what I really want to be doing is making my job the values and the mission of this company. And much to my relief and surprise, he said yes. And so I created a new team called Values and Impact at Etsy. There was a strong engineering culture at Etsy. They were used to hack days where they would stop their regular work and make hacks on the site that would improve the experience. So we decided to do the same thing but make hacks on the company and figure out what are interventions that we could do that would maximize or allow us to do more positive social, economic, and ecological work for the company. Rather than us saying, these are the things that we need to do, because actually we did that a little bit. We calculated the carbon footprint of Etsy, and then we said, isn't this amazing? Now we can filter search results by carbon footprint. We can do all of these things. And the team that worked on search was like, wait, what? Now I have to do this? And I realized that I made a huge mistake, that it wasn't actually like just having the information wasn't enough. You actually had to create opportunities for people to really care about it and make it their own and figure out how they want to address it. And so rather than just saying, here's what we need to do, we said, okay, well, here's the information. Like, what can we do with it? And how do we actually work to support you and your team in sharing the gifts that you have in these matters? Fast forward to 2015, Etsy, I think the way that Etsy went public was pretty great. The S1 that was filed with the SEC said, we will spend more money if it's better for the planet or better for people. We will not prioritize endless economic growth at the expense of people or the planet. And if you don't want that, don't invest in our company. One of the things we also did was use the IPO to create a new organization called Etsy.org. This is the pilot cohort of Etsy.org. You'll see Judy Wicks in the middle. She was a part of all of this. And I left Etsy at the time to run Etsy.org, to become the executive director of Etsy.org. We created Etsy.org. And what we were trying to do was build a school for regenerative enterprise. And the idea ultimately was to build this online, have this be a platform, and it would be like Etsy, anyone could take these business courses. So we decided to pilot the curriculum that we developed first in person. And that was a very eye-opening experience for me, because I realized that so many of the problems that we're facing in the world today actually come from disconnection. Disconnection from ourselves, disconnection from each other, and disconnection from our places, from the earth. And I started having this kind of sneaking suspicion that while the ideas and the values were important, unless we focused on that reconnection, we were just going to end up doing something that was a less bad version of something that fundamentally needs to be reimagined. Dr. Martin Luther King said something to that extent, right? We have to look at a system that produces beggars rather than just trying to help the beggars. It's really important. And so in another, putting myself out there way, I wrote a letter to Etsy's board and I said, can we please can we take Etsy.org away from Etsy and do something a bit different? I don't think what's being called for right now is an online business school. I actually think what we really need is an organization that supports people who are digging into their places and working to build new systems based on a different consciousness, based on something deeper. Another key piece of this was actually that I wanted to move it beyond just business, because while business I think is an important part of our work, it's not all our work. I've now run a couple nonprofit organizations, and that's just as entrepreneurial as any business I've ever run. It's the same challenges, the same kind of thinking. We were talking about it earlier today, those of us with small children, trying to educate them during the pandemic. That's work. That was a lot of work. How we care for our homes and our lands and our relationships, our volunteerism, how we show up in our communities, that's all of our work. And so I started thinking about work more broadly than what we do for a living, but really more about what we bring forth into the world. And so the Good Work Institute was set up to support good work, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So it's not just financial capital, but it's social capital, right? It's the people we know, the connections. It's human capital in terms of our time or the times of other volunteers. And how do we start broadening our notion of capital too? And as we think about that as businesses, I think that's another really important idea, that we can't just chase endless economic or financial capital growth. We have to be thinking about multiple forms of capital if we want to continue to think about growth. I like to think about good work as having a number of principles to it that boil down to a single principle. Embodies integrity. Good work embodies integrity. And this speaks very much to the quality of the work that we do, the wholeness of the work, right? If you make a product or service that's shitty, then you're working without integrity. Good work nourishes our full humanity. I think for ourselves and also for our employees and for our customers, creating stultifying, mind-numbingly boring work does not honor who we are as people. It doesn't nourish all of the faculties that we have. And there's such an opportunity to create work that is nourishing, right? We talked a little bit before about how do you create opportunities for the people on your team to share the gifts that they have, because that's going to be nourishing, and because we are interconnected and interdependent, that will also be the best thing for your company. Good work grows appropriately, and this is a really important one. We can't chase after growth for growth's sake. In a world of finite resources, endless growth will just lead to our demise. So not only do we have to expand our thinking of what growth is in terms of these multiple forms of capital, but that we should grow only when our roots are strong enough in our communities and with our customers and with our employees to support that growth, and that growth serves to benefit them. Good work leaves room for the mystery. And this is, to me, one of the more esoteric but more important ones is that, well, we don't know everything. And we can't hold too tightly to an idea of, that things should be a certain way. What we really need to do is just be open to the world and open to the fact that there's more to it than we realize. Wendell Berry writes about that as good work having religious humility, because not everything is known. Good work knows and honors all the people and places that are touched by the choices we make and the things we do. So I'll just repeat that. Good work knows and honors all the people and places touched by the choices we make and the things we do. So knowing yourself and honoring yourself, knowing your employees and honoring your employees, knowing your customers and honoring your customers, knowing the earth and honoring the earth. And with that broader notion of what work is, not just what we do to make a living. So I'm going to expand upon that notion of good work today through the frame of vocation. So let's talk about vocation. So in modern parlance, outside of some Christian faiths, vocation is mostly considered to be one's job. I also want to talk about an idea of avocation. It's not a word that's commonly used anymore, but generally speaking, an avocation is considered to be a hobby. So one of my kids said something that I loved the other day, so I had to write it down. He told me that his new hobby is eating eggs. So Lewis, my son, his vocation is second grade student, and his avocation is eating eggs. So that's how we think about it. Both vocation and avocation find their root in the Latin verb vocare, to call. So in the case of vocation, we're not really talking about a job, except in some very rare and lucky cases, but more about a calling. In my own life, I have done a lot of different things. In no particular order, I made a list. I have been a professional rock musician, a handyman, a gopher for Kevin Bacon and his brother, a writer, a web designer, a school teacher, an executive at a technology company, a gas station attendant, a wedding singer, the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization, a father, a short order cook, a husband, a graduate student, and a board member. And while all of these things are important to me and have helped me grow and develop in interesting ways, none is my calling per se. My jobs are not my vocation. Instead, I believe vocation is the voice of my essence. It is my nature at its deepest core speaking truthfully. When I listen to it, it drives me to make the choices in life that are integrity with who I am. That was another principle of good work, body's integrity. When I ignore it, as I have done at different times along my own journey, it's been at my own peril, emotionally, professionally, or spiritually. Though on some level, you can't really ignore vocation. You can just fight it. Ultimately, of course, it's a battle you'll lose because you're just trying to beat up yourself. So vocation is the energy or vibe that you bring to anything and everything you do, whether you want to or not. And if one is lucky enough to be able to hear that birthright calling, knowing when you are or when you are not abiding by it,
then they can find themselves on a path of jobs, roles, and pursuits that honor it, and by default honor the world. So it's again what I was talking about yesterday. How do we know ourselves and honor ourselves with our work? How do we know our employees and honor them with the work that we create? How do we know the earth and honor the earth with the choices that we make, whether we're regenerating or extracting? So let's expand on the last thought. What do I mean by honor the world? If you believe, as I do, that we are not separate from anything, that we are interdependent, or as the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh says, that we inter-are with all living creatures and places, then honoring what we are authentically being called to do will also be honoring that which the world is calling uniquely for each of us to do. American author and Presbyterian minister Frederick Buechner puts it another way, and far more eloquently than I ever could. He writes that vocation is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need. Given the ecological and social crises and economic crises we face today, I can think of no calling more important than for each of us to find our own unique way to honor and enliven ourselves, our coworkers and customers, and the earth. Everyone and everything has a vocation. And if we can align them, or as there's a great organization in New Mexico called Regenesis that write a lot about regenerativity, they talk about nesting vocations. I think that's an even better way of thinking about it. So if we can nest our vocations, then we'll be doing the work that is most regenerative. Regenerative to the I, regenerative to the we, regenerative to the it. Like, I remember feeling very ashamed about talking about these ideas, talking about, leading from a heart space rather than just a kind of like mental space, and, just like that imposter syndrome of feeling like I had to act like a CMO and I had to show the board that I could do this, even though it felt totally antithetical to how I felt and what I was being called to do. So I feel like, we need to be able to talk about consciousness. We need to be able to talk about love in business and love in our communities. And we need to be able to, what you said earlier today, like step away from the notion of like the ragged individualists, I alone can do this. It's like, no, it's actually meeting this moment is going to take everybody working from a completely collaborative space. I don't have a television, but I watch stuff on Netflix sometime. I'm not saying that, but I was in a hotel for the first time in 2 years, and I was watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians for a second last night. I was like, oh my God, we're fucked. Like, if this is like the stuff we want to put on television. That brings me to the idea of avocation. As I mentioned earlier, avocation is generally defined as a hobby. However, in my opinion, if vocation is not really a job, avocation is not really a hobby. So if you look at the word, it's a plus vocation. The a comes from the Latin ab, ab, which means away from. And so an abvocation is actually a calling away from. So a calling away from that which we are being truly called to do. And daily, we are bombarded with things that are trying to call us away. Take my phone, for example. We all have these in our pockets generally. And they're designed to be addictive, right? To expertly call us away and inward to their glow so that we may be distracted by their vocation, right? The vocation of a phone is essentially have us consume, whether it's media or advertising or whatever they want us to do, social media. And even worse still, to then have others consume upon the data of our consumption so that they can be more effective at having us consume from them. Then there's the endless parade of dizzyingly bad news. On the planet, our politics and our culture, or lack thereof, also bombarding us through apps, advertisements, billboards, newspapers, television, conversations, websites, emails. It's endless. Equally, if not more unfortunate, we are distracted by media messages that aggrandize and reinforce unrealistic ideas of beauty, wealth, or success. Grow or die, right? It's the same messages, right? We were talking about it. You were just talking about it, Sarah, right? This notion that, okay, well, if we just grow, then that will solve everything. And if we don't grow, then you're a bad person or a bad business person or whatever it may be. The assailment is relentless, wearing us down, distracting us constantly, making us feel awful about ourselves, and calling us far, far away from our authentic nature, which, by the way, does not in actuality value status over community, money over nature, or competition over collaboration. We're not actually wired for that kind of thinking. Most pernicious of all, the more we are called away from what truly matters, the more we are made afraid of it. We allow these outside forces to convince us that what is in our hearts is foolish, hopeless, unrealistic, or inconsequential. We fear discomfort, we fear failure, we fear we are not attractive, rich, connected, or smart enough to find love or success. We fear that we are imposters, and we trust ourselves less and less. I heard this, and you probably have heard this too, that the greatest fear of a CEO is being found out to be an imposter. The more fearful we become, the more we seek answers and guidance from outside, causing us to fight or ignore our own true voice, saying that this is all insane and that we want something different. And it's understandable. It is really scary to live and work authentically. It is an incredibly vulnerable thing to do. However, to do so is probably what the world is most calling for us to do today. The challenges we are facing now are greater than they have ever been. And if we are going to meet them, it will require every single one of you, every single one of us, to cultivate the courage to answer the call. So how might we do it? Well, that is a great question. Good luck, and thanks for coming. No, just that was my joke I wrote in there. Glad you liked it. There is no one answer. That's the tricky thing, right? Because it is different for each of us. But therein also lies the key. To answer the call, we must learn to not be called away from what is inside of ourselves. We must listen for the voice of vocation in our hearts and be unafraid to heed its wisdom. And it's not always easy. The poet David White once wrote, "True vocation calls us out beyond ourselves, breaks our heart in the process, and then humbles, simplifies, and enlightens us about the hidden core nature of the work." Vocation is a journey, and it starts from within. I urge each of you to listen deeply so that with each twist and turn along the way in the journey of your work, your good work, you might begin to realize when you are being called and when you are being called away. In closing, and before we go into the workshop session, I want to leave you with a very short poem that's about 2,600 years old. It's from the Chinese philosopher and progenitor of Taoism, Lao Tzu. And I find myself returning to these words time and time again whenever I am advocated away from the good work that I'm trying to do. And maybe it will be helpful for you when you're being called away. So this poem is called Always We Hope. Always we hope someone else has the answer. Some other place will be better. Some other time it will turn out. This is it. No one else has the answer. No other place will be better, and it has already turned out. At the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are, and you know what you want. There is no need to run outside for better seeing, nor to peer from a window. Rather, abide at the center of your being. For the more you leave it, the less you learn. Search your heart and see the way to do is to be. So, whatever you are called to do, I urge you to trust that voice because it is wise and you are wise.
So why does it matter to talk about vocation? Right? Have any of you ever experienced that moment of doing something that your whole soul is in it? You are aligned and you are alive. Does anyone know what that feels like? Does anyone know what it feels like when you are trudging along endlessly, task, oh, I got to do all this, and it is a burden that sucks your soul? Does anyone know what that feels like? And the reality is we have workers in our companies who are either feeling that vocation of, I'm alive, I get to work today, or they're feeling that, ugh. And we have a responsibility to start with ourselves so that we know how to enable that for other people. And for myself, I was thinking about how, at CTLF, like my vocation led me to want this to be about depth, about creating the conditions for real authenticity, for real growth, transformation to occur so that we could go be our best selves, because I had come from a background where I just struggled to find my way. And so I was always asking advice. What do you think I should do? What do you think I should do? How about you? How about you? Does anybody know what I should be doing? It just seems so foolish now thinking about it, but I was always just trying to give validation, am I on the right track? And I recognized somewhere along the way that doing what was authentic to me and making this community the kind that I could be proud of, that's we all think of this at the end of our lives. Was that worth it? But I was made to feel foolish. Like, you should be making it bigger. You should grow more. Why aren't you growing more? And I remember thinking to myself, well, wait a minute. If I plant the garden and the garden is healthy, it will grow, just maybe not at the pace that other people think. And I don't know if you've ever been in this dichotomy where you feel this pressure to do what matters to you, and then you're pulled away by what you should do. And it's not a good place to be. And I truly believe that this next generation of workers who's coming, they're not going to put up with avocation. They're not going to be put up with being called away from what matters to them. They're going to be seeking out leaders who are able to unleash their full potentials.
But I do remember, Etsy saying, well, we'd come up with a mission, reimagine commerce in ways that build a more fulfilling and lasting world. Mm-hmm. And I said at a board meeting, well, if we really want to build a lasting and fulfilling world, we have to talk about growth, and that we can't just keep trying to sell as much stuff as possible. I learned in a couple painful ways the challenge of holding too tightly to things, holding too tightly to an idea of how something should be done, or holding too tightly to a specific title or whatever it may be. And I've actually found that, very much based on that comment from Charles Eisenstein that I shared earlier today, the best gift you can do is to create opportunities for other people to share their gifts. And so that's always kind of been my management philosophy when I started to have teams that I managed. And so, really, how do we create the right conditions for the wisdom of the group to emerge? And I've found time and time again that when I've done that, the results are always better. They're frustrating because they may not happen as quickly as you had hoped, or in the way that you thought they were going to happen or should have happened. Mm-hmm. But what will happen is that the people involved will be far more bought in and far more invested in it. No politician would ever say, maybe we do need to embrace recession, right? Maybe degrowth is an idea. That's not such a bad thing in a world of finite resources, right? So, that's a really tricky, that's like a third rail in business that people don't like to talk about. Making something that's great, not big, to me, doesn't mean that it can't grow, but it only grows large enough. I like the vision, the metaphor of a tree, right, where the roots need to be deep enough to support that growth. And so that, you don't grow too quickly and topple over because you're not actually rooted in your place or rooted in the earth. And the second piece of it is how do we think about multiple forms of capital when we think of growth? And this is a lot of what I've been thinking about now with the Partners for Climate Action, the project I'm working on now, which very much takes a multi-capital view and says, what are the multiple forms of capital that are needed to support local action on the climate crisis? Because yes, financial capital is needed, but so is human capital, so is social capital, so is intellectual capital. And so I think we need to shift the notion of growth to think about growth in multiple forms of capital, and not growing in one form of capital at the expense of another one. I want to say it's called Purpose is the organization. They're out of Europe somewhere, and they actually create the mission as one of the shareholders. And the mission is one of the owners of the company. It's this really innovative stuff that's out there. So I do hope that there's going to be more of these structures and more investment deals, more regenerative investors who take a blended capital approach or a multi-capital view of the world, and that we can use new legal forms and new ways of structuring investments so that even despite your best intentions, you don't just end up in that same kind of machine. But, I'm not an expert in the world of finance. Yeah. And so, how do we try to take the time to do that introspection so that we can prioritize what's really of value to us? I think the pandemic was a incredible opportunity for like that revisioning. The question is, will we take it, or will we say, how quickly can we get back to normal? One is that I think the culture remains strong, but it evolved, because you can't hold too tightly to it like being the way that it was at the very beginning, but you can try to do the work to install the values and that kind of thinking. I think it's exactly what we were talking about earlier, where it's like you can't have someone who owns the culture. You can't have a keeper of the culture. You actually have to distribute it across the whole company and create lots of opportunities. Actually, one of the simplest things that we did at Etsy was called Etsy School. And it was based entirely on this thing that I keep saying around creating opportunities for people to share their gifts. I was like, we have a lot of really talented people here. Let's create the space and give people the time to teach classes on whatever they want to the company. And it was a really simple thing, and it ended up being one of the biggest drivers of employee well-being. And so a culture that says we value the gifts that you have creates that culture, but the gifts that people have are what emerge. There were engineers who were like, I love Python, I'm going to teach people about Python. And that led to actually a lot of customer support people becoming engineers at Etsy.
So as we close, I want to read a quote for you. It's in your field guide. "Life is something I don't see half enough of," said a thoughtful and sensitive worker. "Perhaps I shall see more soon, because I don't intend to stay in this company much longer. I shall not be missed. Nobody is ever missed. But what of him who takes my place? Will he stick it? If he does, he will receive at the end of 50 years a gold watch, and then he will be able to measure in retrospect the time he's wasted." That's sad. And the reality is that sentiment is happening in the world. And we don't want it to be our companies where people are saying, I can't wait to get out of this company. And I think we owe it to the people who are going to give their lives in service to our companies to make that the kind of environment where they can thrive.